Hi, everybody. I'm going to get started because Ying has very little time and we want to give you some time to ask questions at the end. So I'm going to start to introduce her. Welcome to this session of World IA Day Pittsburgh 2022, titled Be a Firefighter, Inspector, and Navigator in Enterprise UX Team. And we're excited to have you join today's webinar with Ying Wang. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, I'm sorry. As a UX manager at ServiceLink, Ying leads user experience design projects for a large-scale enterprise platforms and consumer-facing financial products. Apart from work, Ying is doing part-time MBA at Carnegie Mellon University with a mission of turning good user experience into a viable business. Before joining ServiceLink in 2017, Ying had been versed in multiple cultures, had worked as a UX designer for 3 years at Bosch USA and Bosch Germany, focused on transferring Internet of Things and machine learning research outcomes to early stage innovative products. Ying holds a bachelor's degree in industrial design from Guangzhou Dianzi University. I also messed that up, I'm sorry, in China, and a master's degree in product service system design from Polytechnic University of Milan in Italy. Ying, welcome and thank you for participating in our event this year. Take control. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you so much, Anthony. Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate your introduction, and you had all the correct pronunciation, by the way. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on Saturday afternoon to join my lightning talk. We know that many different jobs will require us to wear different hats at work. For example, chefs need to wear chef's hats. Engineers need to wear the hard hats. And football players need to wear helmets when they play a game. So my question is, what kind of hats do we wear as UX professionals? You may say helmets because I'm afraid that people will attack me when I share my idea. Just kidding. In today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the 3 hats I wear in an enterprise UX team. As Anthony mentioned earlier, I am a user experience manager at ServiceLink. At the work, I lead the UX teams to build technology-enabled mortgage solutions. I'm also a part-time MBA student at CMU, where I focus on product innovation and data-based decision-making. I have worked 7 years in the field of user experience. In the past years, I have worked on both consumer-facing applications and enterprise software. In today's presentation, I'm going to focus more on enterprise software, but I'm also going to cover the differences between these 2 types of products. Okay, so first thing first, let's define enterprise UX. When I say enterprise UX in this context, I mean the design of the software that helps people to do their job, including the design for internal software solutions a company uses to run their own business, and the software that a company sells to another company to run their business. In the past, when we think about enterprise software, we think about this kind of super aged, cumbersome applications that we hate so much, but we don't have the right to say no to. That is what we do at work, unless you quit your job. However, in the past few years, this kind of attitude has been changed. More and more people start to realize enterprise software makes a huge impact on companies' productivity, especially in this world that we can basically work from anywhere. Without enterprise software, you are not connected with your coworkers. Working on enterprise UX brings us some very unique challenges. So just to name a few, we often need to deal with complicated workflows. We need to learn domain-specific jargons and terminologies. They're not necessarily friendly to people who just joined the industry. Enterprise software often has a dependency on a legacy system if you are refreshing the look and feel of an old system. And you need to talk to a large group of stakeholders. For consumer UX, you might be thinking about 2 or 3 different personas. But when you work on enterprise software, you often need to think about 20 or 30 different user types, and they all have different needs that you need to address. In today's talk, I'm going to cover 3 challenges that I have faced when I work on enterprise UX projects, and then the 3 roles that I played in order to overcome those challenges. So the first one, the struggle of not enough time. Yes, not enough time. Who has enough time, right? If you're like me, you may have heard this from your product team. Hey, when can you get this done? We don't have enough time. Yes, this is pretty common, especially for large scale projects, because we are working on a huge system with limited resource and tight deadlines. Due to its scale, it's sometimes hard for the product team to manage the expectation and then estimate the entire length of the project. It just gives all of us a lot of pressure. And then the second thing you may hear is, oh, we just discovered this new scenario. Can you change your design? You're like, oh my gosh, change the design again? Yes, when you work on enterprise software, you often start from a happy path. But as time goes, you will start to discover more and more of those corner cases and sub-scenarios. As you are discovering those, you may start to realize your original plan, your original design will not apply anymore. And then what should we do? You may have heard this. It will only take a firefighter less than a minute to gear up. This kind of fast speed really comes from years of training and the process standardization. This is what we can learn from the firefighters. Being a firefighter means we will need to define the collaboration process that fits our team culture. We've all learned what good user-centric design process look like from school or from textbooks. But in real life, there is just no one single process that can work for all the teams. What we will need to do is to collaborate closely with our product team, business team, engineering team, so on and so forth, to define this process works the best for this environment. We need to define the stages of your design process, but also for each stage, we need to define things such as who should be involved and what kind of collaboration tools should we use? What are the deliverables out of each stage? What kind of information do we expect from the team in order for us to kick off a new stage? And who approves what and when? When people say, oh, I liked your design, I approved your mockup, what do they mean? Are they approving the data points, the information, the structure, the layout, the visual design? And who should actually be deciding on what? Okay, the second challenge I want to talk about is the battle of consistency and quality. I have heard this from our product team saying, oh, we had assigned these 5 designers to work on the 5 mockups. They all look somehow alike, but they don't look exactly the same. What is going on? Yes, to reach this kind of pixel perfect level consistency for enterprise design is pretty hard because you need multiple designers to work on things in parallel. And different people have their different personal preferences and they are going to interpret things differently, what made things extremely challenging. And then I have heard this from some of our users. They may sometimes say, oh, I hated this new software design. okay, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the day. But I will calm down and ask them, can you talk a little bit more about that? Why did you didn't like this design? They will answer and say, oh, I actually really didn't like the filters on the top of your screen. It is kind of hard to use. Yes, when people say, I don't like your software design, they don't necessarily mean they don't like your concept or the entire structure of your system. Often they mean a very specific components on your screen. This will require us to pay a lot of attention to those details, so things such as data loading speed and micro interactions. Especially for enterprise software, those people need to use your system 8 hours in a day and 5 days a week. So when there's an usability issue out there, because they interact with the elements so often, the level of frustration will add up as time goes. We know that small cracks in the beam can cause an entire building to collapse. What we can learn from the inspectors is a good experience really comes from attention to details. Being an inspector means build your design system and build your design system supporting mechanism. You need to define the process regarding how are you going to define a component. You may need to think about things such as use cases, the rules around the components, the different states and specifications, the micro interactions. You need to run accessibility tests and need to define the code standards. But this is also about the structure, the mechanism, how your team is going to work together to support your design system and all the different touch points. Besides the design system website and a company or product level UI kit, you may also need a project-specific common UI pattern library that people can directly contribute to and grab elements from. And you need design language training, not only for the new designers, but also for the entire organization to bring everybody on board with the design language that you come up with. Okay, the third thing I want to talk about is the risk of losing the big picture. I hear this comment pretty often, probably like once every week or every couple of weeks. People say, you know what, we don't know enough to make a decision. Can we just come back to this later? How many of those meetings ended up with no decision, right? It is easy to understand because it requires a lot of research and cross-team collaborations to make those kind of architectural level decisions. And no decision is a decision. Decision is the hardest thing ever. But what we don't want to do is to leave all the hardest problem to the last minute. Okay, another comment I want to mention is people say, well, do you call it a vendor ID? Like I always call it vendor code or vendor number. Yes, over time, people from different departments and teams identify their own terminology on things. What we don't want to do is just to simply ignore those kind of differences. And so we have like an inconsistent terminology when we rebuild our platform or designing a new system for different departments and across teams. Selling fast is great, but it will only make sense when the direction is actually correct. So what we can learn from the navigators are we should never forget to check the position in the ocean and always need to plan ahead of time. Being a navigator means we need to guide our team towards the information architecture decision. So at the beginning of the project, you need to look at the entire project scope and to prepare to define on the common modules before you start with anything. And during the entire cycle of the project, you need to run different kind of exercise in order for you to get a clear picture of the information architecture. I think one difference for consumer applications versus enterprise apps is for smaller scale consumer apps, you might be able to define a sitemap at the beginning of the project before you even kick off the design process. However, for large scale enterprise applications, this is extremely difficult. You always need to come back to your sitemap and define your sitemap by stages with your team and keep on iterating. You may also need to have your designers to show and tell about the the feature that they are working on. So they don't only see a specific feature, they also understand how different features, different components are connected together. You will need to define or redefine some of the definitions or some of the concepts. So when people talk about the same concept, they know exactly what we're talking about. We're exactly on the same page. And last but not least, we also need good documentations on like all the decisions that we have made so far, so that people can always come back to it if they cannot record what decision was. During this process, we need to answer a few questions, such as, what do we call it? What's the naming convention? What is it? What is the definition of this concept? Who needs it? Who needs to access this feature? And where can we find it, the structure, and where do people click in order to access this feature? Okay, just to quickly recap. So today we talked about the 3 challenges that we faced when working on enterprise UX and the 3 solutions. We want to be the firefighters that can define the collaboration process fits best to our team culture. We want to be the inspectors that can build not only build the design system, but also the design system's supporting mechanism. And we want to be the navigators who can guide the team towards the information architecture decisions throughout the entire journey of the project. So at the end, please allow me to say thank you to my team and to everybody that I have worked with in the past few years. So everything that I mentioned, I didn't come up with those ideas myself. It's really everything that I learned from you. Thank you so much. We also have our product design intern position open, so people feel free to check out. And I will be happy to answer any questions. I do see we have a few chats and Q&A questions popping up. Anthony, it would be great if you can help me with that.
Yeah, let me ask the question for you so that you don't have to ask it of yourself. So we won't have time for a lot of Q&A, unfortunately, but you can find Ying on Wonder to go ask some questions over there and in Slack. But we have one question in already that we can ask is, so one challenge that some face is expert blind spot. How do you, Ying, combat that challenge?
Yeah, this is a great question. A lot of time when we talk to our operation experts, they have been working in the industry for 10, 20 years. People tend to think like things must work this way, especially like I'm in the fintech industry. In mortgage industry, we have so many regulations. Like people tend to think this is the way until when someone else comes into this industry and told you, okay, there's a new way to work things out. There's a new way that we can even change our compliance regulations to do things differently. I think a very important thing is to step back and ask people why, and trying to find out the real reason. And I think this is super difficult sometimes. Like people don't want to ask too many questions because nobody wants to be seen as stupid or not knowing enough about the industry. But I think it's really important for us is to open the discussion, keeps on asking why, and keeps on kind of dig out what's the root cause of the problem, and just to guide guide the people that you work with to think things differently. It's not necessary. I think another thing is to not closely tie what we're working on right now versus the vision, the ultimate goal that as a company that we can reach. People may not feel comfortable to propose a completely different solution when you are talking about this UI that I need to implement for you next month. But when you take a step back to say, okay, if we don't have any kind of limitations, constraint, how would you like this thing to happen? And I think people would feel a little bit more comfortable to talk about different options.
Thank you so much, Ying. I'm going to end it there because we have a human transcriber who probably needs a break. And so thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for coming.